Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and I have something else for you, as I always seem to. This is a little plugin that I'd like to call ClipOnly. Now, here's what ClipOnly is about. The idea is I've got a number of plugins for clipping and gain maximizing and stuff like that, but they often have a lot of complication to them. I had one called NC17 that sort of makes everything a big roaring blur of loud. I've got 80 Clip, which is the most sophisticated recent loudness maximizer. It does some things that some other plugins have going on, like supplementing the sound with clipped off energy and reintroducing it back into the sound again to make things louder. There's a fairly notable plugin that's kind of old that did that. But my concern is that these things are too fussy and complicated, and they're just begging people to make stuff louder than it really should be. So what I wanted to do was come up with a very simple plugin. This one. ClipOnly, as you can see, has no controls. It is negative 0.2 dB, and it will clip everything that goes anywhere near that. Well, that's putting it a little strongly. It clips everything that goes above that. But there's something special about it. Otherwise, what would be the point? It is the latest clip thing that I've ever done and has the most recent algorithms. And probably what I should do is just show you, which I can do in a number of ways. Here's one. I can put some music on. Now you can see that I've got a gain control up here. Here's ClipOnly. And then here is a gain pad, 24 dB down. That's so that I don't blow your head off when I do this. This 22 dB of clipping doesn't normally sound good with music, especially music with a lot of bass and a lot of noise like this one. But the idea is you should be able to throw a bunch of gain onto music. 6 dB is a lot for clipping as well. We can see on Voxengo Span's metering that even without the gain, this is already a pretty loud track. It's going right up to the iron bar, as it were. So when we turn on about 5 dB again, it rapidly becomes completely blown out. But ClipOnly resists pushing the high frequencies to the point where they start to sound hard. And I have another way of illustrating that, which is here. White noise. Watch what happens to this angle as I start to push the gain. Because ClipOnly, I can actually show you what it does. You would imagine that if I had a sine wave going on, that it would put a series of harmonics, and since it is essentially a hard digital clipper with some additional behavior, that it would immediately throw out the full spectrum of harmonics, and they would just get louder and louder and then add lots of aliasing and all that kind of stuff. It's not quite like that. What we get is this. The instant it's loud enough to clip, we get our harmonics, but notice the way that they're not even. ClipOnly manages the edges of the high frequencies in a rather special way. For instance, you'll see here that the 7K one is a whole bunch of dB down from what it might be. And then as we keep on pushing it, now the 5 dB one is down. And so on and so forth. Now this is aliasing. It's not super powerful aliasing. The reason it does this is ClipOnly handles the onset and the release from clipping in a special way. It goes into clipping more smoothly by catching the sample before the initial sample of clipping doesn't go up to the full amount, and then the last sample exiting clipping doesn't go up to the full amount. In fact, it smooths off the entry into clipping, and that's what's causing that. As a result, if we look at the white noise, we'll see an interesting result. White noise is interesting. If you quantize white noise, it sounds much the same. If you clip white noise, it's also going to sound much the same. You're not going to really hear a distinct difference between regular white noise and heavily clipped white noise spectrally. But watch what happens. Look at that, it's flat. But there's more. If we continue pushing even harder, here's what we get. ClipOnly is able to handle the way that it hits the stage of clipping to where high frequencies don't get harsh. And we can see this again on the music. If you want to call this music, it's actually generated by an old iPhone app that I had and was playing with. It's a bunch of my samples put together, and it's just doing its crazy little electronic thing. I keep this around because it's good at challenging clippers and things like that. The intensity of completely artificial tones in here means that it makes it very obvious what you get when you're changing the loudness and gain of something of this nature. Also, the extreme highs run out on this one as well, so when we start pushing it, that's pretty much where it cuts off. But at no point do we get a sort of rise in output due to all of the high frequency clipping, and this is something that we would get if we were just clipping this thing straight up. Instead, you get a sort of grunge going on. You can see on the output level that it's just fried. One normally doesn't try to distort music 18 dB. That's way over the top. Actually, no. 30 dB is way over the top. And see how it's still resisting the... That's so obnoxious I had to turn it down. See how it's still resisting going super bright on the highs. This is what ClipOnly is for. I can also throw on the noise just for laughs. And this is the kind of mess you get. Actually, that was silly. I'll just turn it back off again. The way it's handling the high frequencies, the way it's handling that harsh grunge, that edge of the raw clipping, is what ClipOnly is about. Now, there is another thing to this as well that I'm going to mention, because there's nothing more to hear here. And if you had any questions, you can just download it because it is free. Here's the deal. I have left ClipOnly featureless for a reason. Here, I'll set it over here. When you're a plugin manufacturer, that's making plugins for $50 a pop, which I did for pretty close to 10 years, and you're staying in business, it tends to force you to do things like come up with new controls, new features, new ways for people to actively engage with your plugins. Things like, I can show you a picture of, here, check this out. This is the most recent 80 clip, and it's got your input gain, and it softens clips in a particular kind of way. You can adjust where that comes in. It's not just the only number, but that feeds into the algorithms. We've got a fat and body control, which can give it an extra fullness that's not part of the original sound. It's an added thing. You got highs retained. You got subs retained. These are the things that another plugin that starts with FG kind of pioneered. And all it does is it takes clipped off sound energy and finds a way of reintroducing it into the sound again, just to keep everything as loud as possible. But that has no musical relation to the sound whatsoever. All it's good for is making stuff louder. We got the modes. I can do a clip-only mode and monitor that. I can output gain match, which is nice for, finding in the event that you ever want to be like, this is as loud as I can push it, while not drastically changing the tone. And you've got all of these things. And I don't think they help people all that much. I don't. Because when you're fooling around with all that kind of, if you were a mastering engineer, perhaps that degree of control would be handy for you. People just making mixes and working creatively with music and trying to do their thing don't necessarily benefit from this overload of information, overload of extra stuff. You shouldn't be thinking about that while you're playing a guitar solo. For that matter, you shouldn't be thinking about that while you're trying to pick the right sound that's going to go into a loop for your psytrance thing, or work out, since in something like psytrance or house music, you're doing basically cycles and loops and things, and there's a hypnotic effect, but you're thinking about what sounds you're putting into it. If you suddenly get distracted by how you're hitting a clipper or a limiter, and you're fussing around with that, you're going to lose track of the creative input that's supposed to be going into the music. And I really believe that. And for that reason, my job as a plugin developer, or as a working commercial plugin developer, selling things for $50 a pop, is against what's good for working musicians and producers and people who are coming up with creative music and making it happen in their computer, putting together sounds to be interesting and original and novel. I don't think you can do that while staring down the barrel of a bunch of freaky controls and fussing over the exact amount of highs lift that you're reintroducing into the sound just in order to make it go that much louder than the next thing. ClipOnly is something that I can do because I've done this Patreon thing. You could say that I'm still a commercial developer. I certainly would like to see people supporting my work, but it's not tied to selling any given plugin. It is tied to me continuing to come out with stuff that makes people's production, musical, mixing lives better. This is how I'm doing it now. ClipOnly here. See. I could have put controls on it. Here, I'll take these other ones away. I'll take the test oscillator away. So there's ClipOnly. I could have had a gain threshold, but I have done mastering work. I know that there is a reason that you'd set the gain threshold for a clipper lower than 0 dB. It's because as you clip, some playback systems don't want to be pushed all the way to the brink. If you have, here, I'll draw you a picture. If you have a series of samples like this, and a sound is coming back through them, it doesn't go through the middle of the samples. What you get is something that's going to be directed by the samples, and it can overshoot. You can have a series of samples like that, and the output isn't going to go like an angle here. It's going to start doing a wiggle thing and then overshoot to some extent, because that's how digital sampling works. One of the things that ClipOnly does is that reduction of high frequencies that I showed you, it is restricting specifically stuff like this. If ClipOnly hits this particular sample and your clip point would be there, it's not going to put that single sample there. It's going to be sitting somewhere around here, and you're not going to be overloading the output because of the way that it goes into the clip point and softens the things. For instance, if you had, say, look at me, the visual aids. This is the kinds of visual aids that you get when you run a Patreon and you don't have a lot of money just yet. I'll do them in oil paints if I get lots of money. Anyways, your signal is coming in through here. Rather than going up to this and then having this sharp corner, what's going to happen is ClipOnly is going to make this shape happen. It's going to go up more smoothly, and then as it leaves, it's also going to smooth off the departure. When it does this, it generates less of these overshoots here. It's called Gibb effect. It's a known behavior of digital audio converters. And that's pretty much all it does around that. It's a fairly simple solution to the problem, but it's an effective solution to the problem. And the clip point is minus 0.2 dB, so that it can still be allowed output, but that's just shy of causing serious problems, particularly when you notice that it does this smoothing off part. It's like my job as a developer is to know and figure out some of this kind of stuff, so that if I come back again and I'm, say, mixing some music, I'm doing something in Logic, I'm doing something in whatever I might be using, the point is that I don't need to be thinking about that when I'm doing the creative work. So the whole idea of ClipOnly is that this is a safety clipper, or a last thing on your mix clipper if you're going directly to output. If you have a workflow going on, which is I think a popular thing, where you just do your work and mix it straight through the output of the DAW and put that immediately onto YouTube or whatever. Who does CDs anymore, right? You shouldn't be thinking about the little micro details of how that works out. This should be a good, solid, general purpose clipper for those kinds of things. If you're using it to catch just the occasional over, it's going to do that very cleanly. It's going to soften high frequencies when you're hitting it a little harder, or when it's a high frequency thing that is the occasional over. And if you blast it away completely, I think it has its own distinct sound to it. But this is not something to fuss over. This is not something to focus on in the mix. It is strictly a catch the clips and only the clips, If you're not clipping, it doesn't change a single sample. It's doing this stuff here, the way that I've depicted it, with only the samples that have already been clipped. So the ones that are within this range are all fine. Nothing's getting changed that's not supposed to be getting changed. And as you can see, there's no controls. Trust me. You don't need to get a bunch of plugins and a bunch of processors and things loaded with all kinds of controls and stuff to make you feel like you have more for your money of buying the plugins and having the plugins make you work really hard to operate them. There's also one other little detail. ClipOnly also runs a sample of latency, but it doesn't declare a sample of latency, and there's a reason for that. I like to have my plugins for a digital audio workstation have no latency, because I'd like to be able to track into a mix and play directly into it. And that's not always something that you can do with a bunch of very fancy, elaborate plugins that are doing lots of overprocessing and declaring a bunch of latency. It's going to make everything feel kind of unconnected. So for that reason, I do run one sample of delay in ClipOnly, and you might want to know about that if you're sticking it on some drum submix or something like that. You wouldn't necessarily want to leave that uncorrected if you're combining it with, say, a dry channel or something like that. That's not really what this is for. But it doesn't declare the sample of latency because I have a load of other stuff like console, pressure, Fathom 5, stuff that I use to put together a mix that I can use to track through. And ClipOnly is the second final thing on the stage, if you don't count dithers and stuff like that, which lets you catch the overs of such a mix, but it's not declaring any latency, so it's not really getting the workstation to jump into its let's declare all the latency and figure out how much we need and all that kind of stuff. With ClipOnly, you can pretend that the entire recording chain has no latency other than what the DAW will provide, which could be very small depending upon, the plugins are efficient, and it's just better recording stuff through no latency. Airwindows ClipOnly is a very simple little plugin by design, and there's no controls, and it should be as reliable as a rock, and you shouldn't ever have to think about it. And that's a funny thing for a plugin maker to say, that you shouldn't have to think about it, but I think that that is a valuable thing in its own right. Once you learn how to use these things, just like it was when we were using tape machines and stuff like that, you shouldn't have to think about them. You should be able to just use them and not be all distracted by fiddling with all the little controls and things like that. So ClipOnly is another step in that process, another stage. I really hope that you like it. I like it. I'm going to be using it. Thanks.